The most feared crime boss in New York was taking his final breath. World-renowned surgeons had surrendered. His ruthless cartel stood weeping in the shadows. But when a timid, plus-sized night nurse leaned over his broken body for one forbidden, desperate kiss, the monitors spiked. The king wasn't dead yet. The unlisted 14th floor of Lenox Hill Hospital was a fortress. Heavily armed men in bespoke Italian suits patrolled the sterile corridors, their eyes scanning every doctor, every nurse, and every shadow. At the center of this armed perimeter lay Damien Costello, the undisputed head of the Costello Syndicate. A man who had survived car bombs, federal indictments, and a dozen assassination attempts, was now being dismantled by something invisible. He had been poisoned. It wasn't a crude heavy metal or a common street drug. It was a synthesized, untraceable neurotoxin, slipped into his espresso during a sit-down in Little Italy 3 days ago. Now, the 34-year-old Mafia boss lay in the VIP suite, his broad, deeply tattooed chest rising and falling with the aid of a mechanical ventilator. His skin, usually a warm olive tone, had turned the color of wet ash. Inside the suite, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dr. Harrison Keller, a world-renowned toxicologist flown in on a private jet from Stanford Medical Center, stood at the foot of the bed, rubbing his temples in defeat. Beside him, Dr. Jonathan Vander Beek, Manhattan's most elite neurologist, aggressively typed on a tablet, looking for miracles in medical databases that simply did not exist. "His organs are shutting down in sequence," Dr. Keller announced, his voice tight with frustration and no small amount of fear. He glanced nervously at Enzo, Damien's hulking, scarred underboss, who was currently white-knuckling a Beretta inside his coat pocket. "The liver function is gone. Kidneys are failing. His heart rate is dropping by the hour. We've pumped him full of broad-spectrum chelating agents, activated charcoal protocols, and every synthetic antidote known to modern science. Nothing is binding to the toxin. It's a complete cellular lockout." "Then try something else," Enzo growled, his voice a gravelly whisper that made the multi-millionaire doctors flinch. "You don't get to give up. He dies, and this whole hospital is going to need an influx of body bags." Standing quietly in the corner of the expansive room, entirely ignored by the powerful men arguing over the dying king, was Penelope Brooks. Penelope was a night shift floor nurse. At 26 years old, she was fiercely intelligent, fiercely compassionate, and completely invisible. She was a heavy woman, carrying over 240 pounds on a 5'4" frame. For her entire life, society had made sure she knew exactly where she stood. She was the funny friend, the good listener, the woman whose thick thighs chafed in her oversized scrubs, whose soft, round stomach she constantly tried to hide behind clipboards and medical carts. She had a pretty, heart-shaped face, with warm, expressive brown eyes. But Penelope had long ago accepted that in a world obsessed with angles and perfection, her soft curves made her a ghost. But being a ghost had its advantages. People didn't watch ghosts. People didn't hide things from ghosts. For the past 3 nights, while the arrogant specialists shouted at each other and the Mafia soldiers intimidated the staff, Penelope had been the only one actually tending to Damien the human being, rather than Damien the medical anomaly. She was the one who carefully bathed his feverish skin. She was the one who applied unscented lotion to his large, calloused hands so his skin wouldn't crack from the dry hospital air. She was the one who noticed how his jaw would twitch right before his blood pressure plummeted. Penelope looked at Damien now. Even dying, he was devastatingly handsome. He had a strong, aristocratic jawline, high cheekbones, and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. A jagged scar ran through his left eyebrow, a testament to a violent life that Penelope could barely comprehend. Yet when she was alone with him in the dead of night, talking softly to him about her favorite books and her quiet, lonely life in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, he didn't look like a monster. He just looked like a man who was terribly, agonizingly cold. His bradycardia is worsening, Dr. Van der Beek sighed, watching the monitor as Damien's heart rate dipped to 28 beats per minute. The electrical pathways in the myocardium are being severed by the toxin. I'm sorry, Enzo. We have maybe an hour. You need to call his family. Gather the captains. It's over. Enzo let out a choked, devastated sob, turning away to punch the heavy oak door of the suite, splintering the wood. The doctors, taking this as their cue to exit before the grief turned violently outward, quietly packed their briefcases and scurried out of the room, leaving Penelope alone with the weeping mobster and the dying boss. Penelope stepped closer to the bed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She looked at the IV bags pumping clear fluids into Damien's veins. She looked at the EKG monitor. Then she looked at his hands. His fingernails weren't blue from lack of oxygen. They were deeply, vividly purple, almost black at the cuticles. A memory sparked in Penelope's mind. A buried, obscure medical journal article she had read during a lonely Friday night shift months ago regarding synthetic derivatives of the aconite plant. Specifically, a modified strain of monkshood used by Eastern European assassins. The doctors had been treating him for a paralytic neurotoxin, pumping him full of calcium channel blockers and standard epinephrine. But if it was modified aconite, the epinephrine wasn't just failing to help. It was actively accelerating the myocardial depression. The standard treatment was killing him. Enzo, Penelope said, her voice shaking. It was the first time she had spoken above a whisper in 3 days. The large man turned, his eyes red-rimmed and furious. What? Get out of here, nurse. He doesn't need his pillows fluffed. The doctors are wrong, Penelope stammered, her hands gripping the thick fabric of her scrubs. I think I know what's killing him. And I think I know how to shock his system back. Enzo stared at the trembling, heavy-set nurse as if she had lost her mind. The best doctors in the country just walked out that door, sweetheart. You think you know something they don't? They were looking for a complex, synthetic blockade, Penelope urged, stepping forward, her fear of the dangerous mobster temporarily eclipsed by her desperate need to save the man on the bed. But look at his nail beds. Look at the muscular rigidity in his jaw. It's aconitine toxicity, a highly concentrated, genetically modified version. The medications they've been giving him via IV are binding with the poison and creating a fatal feedback loop. We have to stop the IVs. Before Enzo could object, Penelope reached up with surprisingly steady hands and shut off the main IV valves, stopping the flow of the expensive, useless antidotes. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Enzo barked, taking a step toward her. He needs a massive, immediate dose of pure atropine, combined with a violent sensory shock to the parasympathetic nervous system to break the vagal nerve blockade, Penelope said rapidly, pulling a crash cart closer to the bed. Her mind was racing. She popped open a drawer and retrieved a small vial of atropine and a blister pack of a potent, fast-acting sublingual vasodilator she knew was kept in the cardiac emergency kits. I have to get this into his bloodstream instantly, she muttered to herself, her fingers fumbling slightly as she crushed the pills into a fine powder and mixed it with a few drops of the atropine liquid, creating a potent, bitter paste. She turned to Damien. "I need to put this under his tongue. It's the only mucosal membrane that will absorb it fast enough before his heart stops completely." Penelope leaned over Damien's face. She placed her thumbs on his chin, trying to pry his mouth open. But his jaw was locked tight. The toxin had induced a state of tetany in his facial muscles. It was like trying to pry apart solid steel. "Open his mouth!" Enzo yelled, realizing the nurse was deadly serious. He rushed over, his large, scarred hands joining hers, trying to force the boss's jaw down. But it was useless. The lock was absolute. The heart monitor let out a high-pitched, terrifying shriek. Beep. 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 The numbers were dropping. 20 beats per minute. 15. "He's flatlining!" Enzo screamed, sheer panic stripping away his hardened Mafia exterior. "Do something!" Penelope's chest heaved. Her heart was beating so fast, she felt dizzy. The paste was on her gloved finger, drying quickly. She couldn't get it past his teeth. If she tried to inject it, the peripheral shutdown meant it would take too long to reach his heart. It had to be sublingual. It had to be absorbed through the mouth. There was only one way. "God, please forgive me," Penelope whispered. She ripped off her latex glove. She scooped the bitter, chemical paste onto her own tongue. It tasted like battery acid and crushed aspirin. It burned instantly. "What are you doing?" Enzo shouted. Penelope didn't answer. She leaned over Damien Costello. She looked at his pale, beautiful face, knowing that if she failed, his men would likely kill her. And if she succeeded, this ruthless man would wake up and be furious that a fat, nobody nurse had dared to touch him. But Penelope didn't care about the consequences. Her soul ached for this man. She had poured all her hidden, unexpressed love into caring for him over these agonizing nights. She pressed her mouth tightly against his. His lips were freezing cold and chapped. Penelope clamped her hands on either side of his face, tilting his head back to open his airway as much as possible. She forced her soft, warm lips firmly over his locked mouth. Drawing in a deep breath through her nose, she used the pressure of her own mouth and the strength of her tongue to push the potent, burning paste past the slight gap in his clenched teeth, forcing it into his oral cavity, down toward the sublingual glands under his tongue. She didn't pull away. The medical journal had said a violent sensory shock was needed to break the vagal nerve paralysis. She needed his brain to register an overwhelming external stimulus. So Penelope Brooks kissed him. She kissed the dying Mafia boss with every ounce of passion, grief, and desperate yearning she had locked inside her heavy body for 26 years. She kissed him as if her own breath could restart his heart. She tangled her fingers into his dark hair, tears slipping down her plump cheeks and falling onto his skin, pressing her warm, soft curves against his rigid, freezing chest. It wasn't just a medical maneuver. It was a profound, heartbreaking transfer of life. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The room was deathly silent, save for the horrifying, continuous drone of the flatlining heart monitor. Then, Penelope felt it. A violent, electric twitch beneath her hands. Damien's jaw suddenly slackened. His chest convulsed, arching off the mattress with terrifying force. Penelope gasped and pulled back, stumbling away from the bed. Damien sucked in a massive, ragged breath of air, sounding like a drowning man breaking the surface of a frozen lake. The heart monitor abruptly changed its tune. The flatline shattered into steep, jagged peaks. Beep, 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 beep. His heart rate was rocketing. 40, 60, 90 beats per minute. Enzo dropped to his knees, his hands clutching his head, a mixture of a laugh and a sob escaping his throat. Damien's eyes snapped open. They were the most piercing, icy shade of blue Penelope had ever seen. They were wild, feral, and completely lucid. He didn't look like a dying man anymore. He looked like a predator that had just been unleashed. He ripped the ventilator mask off his face, coughing violently, coughing up a small amount of dark fluid before falling back against the pillows, panting heavily. The color was already rushing back into his face. The vasodilator was opening his veins. The atropine was blocking the toxin's grip on his heart. Damien slowly turned his head. His chest heaved as he scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the weeping Enzo and locking directly onto Penelope. She was standing pressed against the far wall, her face flushed red, trembling uncontrollably, the bitter taste of the medicine still burning her lips. She wrapped her arms tightly around her heavy waist, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear back into the background. But Damien Costello wasn't looking at a ghost. He was looking at her. And as his chest rose and fell with new life, his eyes darkened with an intense, unreadable emotion that made Penelope's newly awakened heart skip a beat. The sudden, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor echoed through the VIP suite at Lenox Hill Hospital like a victory march. Just minutes ago, it had been a death knell. Now the heavy oak doors burst open, and Dr. Harrison Keller and Dr. Jonathan van der Beek rushed back into the room, flanked by a half-dozen panicked hospital administrators. They froze in their tracks. Instead of a corpse, they found Damien Costello sitting upright against the pillows, a cold, predatory fury radiating from his sharp blue eyes. His bare chest, dusted with dark hair and intricate ink, rose and fell with strong, unassisted breaths. The deadly pallor was gone, replaced by a flush of returning blood flow. Enzo, the terrifying underboss, was standing guard by the bed, weeping openly, his massive hands gripping the rails. What happened here? Dr. Keller stammered, his eyes darting to the disconnected IV lines and the crushed blister pack of vasodilators on the floor. This is medically impossible. The cellular lockout. Shut your mouth, Damien rasped. His voice was hoarse, a gravelly baritone that commanded instant, absolute silence. He shifted his piercing gaze from the trembling specialists to the corner of the room. Penelope Brooks was still pressed against the wall, her hands shaking so violently she had to cross her arms to hide them. Her plus-sized frame, hidden beneath shapeless navy blue scrubs, felt heavier than ever under the sudden weight of the Mafia boss's intense scrutiny. Her lips still tingled with the burning, bitter residue of the atropine paste. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "The girl," Damien demanded, his eyes never leaving Penelope. "What did she do?" Enzo wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, his voice thick with awe. "The doctors were killing you, boss. They had it wrong. The nurse, she knew what it was. Aconitine. She cut the IVs. She mixed up some powder and forced it under your tongue. She kissed you to make you swallow it and shock your system." Dr. van der Beek gasped, his face turning a mottled red. "That is a severe breach of protocol. Aconitine toxicity is incredibly rare. If she administered unauthorized sublingual nitrates without a physician's order, she could have triggered irreversible hypotension. You are fired, nurse. I will have your license revoked by the New York State Board of Nursing before noon." Damien's head snapped toward the neurologist, his jaw clenching. Enzo. In a blur of motion, Enzo drew his Beretta and pressed the cold steel barrel directly between Dr. Van der Beek's eyes. The doctor whimpered, his knees buckling slightly. You and your Stanford friend have exactly 10 seconds to pack your bags and walk out of my hospital, Damien said, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. If I ever see your faces in New York City again, I won't need a medical board to end your careers. I'll end your lives. The doctors didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled backward, nearly tripping over each other as they fled the suite, leaving the hospital administrators to scatter like frightened mice. Silence descended on the room again. Damien turned his attention back to Penelope. The predatory edge in his eyes softened, replaced by a burning, complex curiosity. Come here, he commanded softly. Penelope hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. She took a timid step forward, keeping her head bowed, acutely aware of how her thighs brushed together beneath her scrubs, acutely aware that she was not the type of woman men like Damien Costello looked at twice. Beautiful, thin, glamorous women belonged in his world, not a quiet, overweight girl from a cramped apartment in Bay Ridge. She stopped a few feet from his bed, staring at her scuffed white nursing clogs. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I overstepped. I'll pack up my locker. Look at me, Damien said. It wasn't a request. Penelope slowly raised her head, his striking blue eyes locked onto her warm brown ones. The jagged scar through his eyebrow gave him a dangerous, rugged look, but his gaze was surprisingly gentle. What is your name? He asked. Penelope, she breathed. Penelope Brooks. Penelope. He tasted the name, his tongue brushing against the roof of his mouth. You didn't overstep, Penelope. You saved my life when the most expensive men in medicine left me to rot. You broke every rule to keep me breathing. Why? Because you were cold, she blurted out, her cheeks flushing crimson the moment the words left her mouth. And nobody deserves to die in a room full of people who only see them as a problem to be solved. You're a person. Damien stared at her, genuinely stunned. In his world of blood, betrayal, and immense wealth, people only saw him as a weapon, a shield, or a target. This shy, soft-spoken woman saw him as a human being. He noticed the gentle curve of her hips, the flush in her full cheeks, and the absolute lack of pretense in her eyes. Enzo, Damien ordered, not looking away from Penelope. Get the cars ready. We are leaving. Boss, you just woke up, Enzo protested. You need rest. I am not recovering in a building full of people who just tried to bury me, Damien growled, throwing off the thin hospital blanket, revealing a torso scarred by bullets and knives, yet terrifyingly powerful. We go to the Tribeca penthouse and pack a bag for Miss Brooks. Penelope's eyes widened in panic. What? No, I can't. I have shifts. I have a cat. Your cat is coming with us, Damien said, standing up. The room spun for a second, but he caught himself. He stepped into her personal space, his towering frame dwarfing her. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing over the soft flesh of her cheek. Someone in my inner circle poisoned me, Penelope, he murmured, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. Someone switched my espresso at the sit-down. I can't trust my men. I can't trust my doctors. The only person in this city I know for a fact wants me alive is you. You are my private nurse now, and I protect what is mine. The penthouse in Tribeca was a sprawling fortress of glass, steel, and dark mahogany, offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. For 3 weeks, Penelope lived in a state of surreal, high-stakes isolation. She had her own lavish suite, a wardrobe filled with expensive, custom-tailored clothes that actually flattered her curves, and a terrifyingly handsome Mafia boss who refused to let her out of his sight. Damien's recovery was aggressive, fueled by an iron will. Penelope monitored his vitals, managed his diet, and forced him to rest when his stubbornness flared. But the dynamic between them had shifted from clinical to something deeply intoxicating. Damien didn't look at her like she was a ghost. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. When she read to him on the velvet sofa, his eyes would trace the soft lines of her neck and the fullness of her figure with a dark, heavy hunger that made her pulse race. He complimented her intelligence. He demanded her opinions on his business ledgers. He made her feel seen, powerful, and, for the first time in her life, incredibly beautiful. But the shadow of the poisoner hung over them. The Costello cartel was tearing the city apart trying to find the traitor, and the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. It was a rainy Tuesday night when the illusion of safety shattered. Penelope was in the sprawling kitchen, brewing a specialized herbal tea to help soothe Damien's lingering muscle tremors. Damien was in his office down the hall, supposedly resting. The penthouse was quiet, guarded only by Dominic Salvatore, a high-ranking lieutenant and Damien's oldest childhood friend who had taken over Enzo's shift. Penelope turned toward the marble island and froze. Dominic was standing in the doorway, staring at her. The charming, easygoing smile he usually wore was gone, replaced by a most dead-eyed calculation. In his right hand, resting casually against his thigh, was a suppressed Glock 19. "You know, you're a real problem, nurse," Dominic said smoothly, stepping into the kitchen and closing the heavy oak doors behind him. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, piecing the puzzle together in a horrifying instant. The sit-down in Little Italy. Dominic had been the one to hand Damien the espresso, the doctors missing the aconitine. Dominic had arranged the medical team. "It was you," she whispered, backing away until her hips hit the marble counter. "I had a deal with the Russian syndicate," Dominic sighed, raising the gun slightly. $50 million and total control of the docks if Costello had a quiet, medical death. No war, no mess, just a tragic heart failure. And then you had to play hero and shove atropine down his throat. Penelope's hands scrambled blindly behind her, her fingers brushing against a heavy, cast-iron skillet resting on the stove. "He trusted you. You're his brother. In this life, there are no brothers. Only opportunities," Dominic sneered, raising the gun and aiming it squarely at her chest. "I'll make it look like a break-in, a tragic end to his little savior." As Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger, a thunderous roar echoed through the kitchen. The heavy oak doors exploded inward, shattering off their hinges. Damien stood in the doorway, an absolute vision of lethal, unbridled violence. He hadn't been resting. He had been reviewing the security footage from Little Italy. He had seen the sleight of hand. Before Dominic could pivot his weapon, Damien moved with terrifying speed. He didn't fire the weapon in his own hand. He wanted this personal. He tackled Dominic to the floor, the suppressed gun skittering across the imported tiles. The two men crashed into the kitchen island, shattering glass and scattering Penelope's medical supplies. Dominic fought back with the desperation of a dead man, landing a brutal punch to Damien's recovering ribs. Damien barely flinched. The betrayal fueled a monstrous adrenaline rush. He gripped Dominic by the throat, hoisting him up and slamming him against the stainless steel refrigerator with bone-crushing force. "50 million, Dom?" Damien roared, his voice shaking the crystal fixtures. "You sold my life for 50 million. With a sickening crack, Damien delivered a final devastating blow, rendering the traitor unconscious. He let Dominic's body slump to the floor, breathing heavily, his knuckles bleeding. Members of his personal guard, alerted by the noise, swarmed into the kitchen, dragging the unconscious lieutenant away to face a fate worse than death. Damien didn't watch them leave. He turned frantically to Penelope. She was sliding down the cabinets, her hands covering her face, sobbing uncontrollably as the sheer terror of the moment finally broke over her. Damien crossed the room and dropped to his knees in front of her. He didn't care about the blood on his hands or the pain in his chest. He pulled her heavy, trembling body into his arms, crushing her against him. "I've got you. You're safe. I have you," he murmured fiercely into her hair, rocking her back and forth. "He was going to kill you," Penelope choked out, burying her wet face in his neck. "He was going to finish it." "He failed," Damien said, pulling back just enough to frame her tear-stained, beautiful face in his large hands. His blue eyes burned with an intensity that chased away the cold shadows of the room. "Because of you. You saved me in that hospital, Penelope, and you gave me the time to find the rat." He leaned in, the space between them disappearing. This time, there was no bitter medicine, no frantic desperation, no dying breaths. When Damien Costello pressed his lips to hers, it was a profound, scorching declaration of absolute devotion. He kissed her deeply, exploring her warmth, his hands sliding down to grip her soft, full waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest, proving that he didn't want a ghost. He wanted every real, beautiful inch of her. Penelope melted into the kiss, her insecurities dissolving into the undeniable truth of his touch. She had stepped out of the shadows to save a dying king, and in return, he had crowned her his queen. The shy nurse who once hid in the shadows just became the undisputed queen of the Costello Syndicate. Damien and Penelope proved that true power isn't about fitting a perfect mold. It's about bravery, loyalty, and fierce, undeniable love. What did you think of Dominic's shocking betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this intense Mafia romance, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories.